In answer to that question, what is it like to be a best-selling novelist, I tell people this true story about my kids when they were little. My kids are grown now, but when my daughter was 5, I took her to a book event. You know, I was doing a book signing. So we went to the store, and the lady who owned the store came over and greeted us and asked my daughter, do you know why all these people are here? And my daughter said, yes, I do know. Why are they here? They want my dad to sign their book. And why is that? Because my dad has the nicest handwriting. She's 24, probably still believes that, for all I know. You know, that calligraphy has worked out so well for my father. Now, my son, he's always been like my little entrepreneur, you know, how can I make some money fast kind of kid. And so when he was 3, I took him to a bookstore just to buy some books. I wasn't doing an event, but he knew what I did for a living. So we went to the bookstore, went in, and all of a sudden my kid sees all the people, all these books, and like a light bulb went off in his head. And he started running across the floor of the bookstore screaming at the top of his lungs, my daddy will sign any book you've got for $2. I have a couple of TV projects that I'm working on. One is for the John Puller television series. I'm working with Sony Studios, and another producer, Gary Oldman, the actor Gary Oldman, who won the Oscar for Darkest Hour on that project, and another TV project I'm working on. We'll see how they come. It's interesting, when you write a book, you think, okay, here's a story, you give it out to people, and they're going to enjoy it, and that'll be the end of it. But sometimes when you put a book out there, it has unintended consequences. And that happened to me one time. I wrote a book in the late 90s called The Winner. Yes, and in The Winner, my villain, Jackson, who I still get emails about, people like, when is Jackson coming back? I'm like, well, he died. But I guess I can bring him back. You know, it is fiction, so I can do anything. But in The Winner, Jackson figured out a way to fix the United States National Lottery. And he did it in a way that did not involve co-conspirators. You know, I will tell you, you know, by definition, a conspiracy involves more than one person. But if you're going to actually do something like that, don't have co-conspirators for a couple of reasons. One, human beings make mistakes, particularly under pressure, right? And human beings can also rat you out when things go bad, right? You know, that's, you know, we hear about that in Washington, D.C. every day. Anyway, so if you're going to commit a conspiracy, just make it a conspiracy of one. But I'm not telling you to do a conspiracy, because that's not good either. So anyway, the book came out, and the way my villain orchestrated fixing it was based on science. He didn't need people to infiltrate the lottery. It was just science. And the cool thing about science is if you have A and you couple it with B, the result is C. Not 90% of the time or 95% of the time, but it's 100% of the time. That's what the result will be. It's perfection, and that's the way he did it. So the book came out, and I do remember while I was writing it, I had initially, in the initial draft, I had made the jackpot $180 million, right? So my agent read the book, the manuscript, and he thought it was great. And he goes, but look, there's got to make one change. The jackpot is never going to get that high. You go, are you crazy, $180 million? So in the book, I cut it back to an even $100 million to make him happy. And of course, a few years ago, when the jackpot got to $1.2 billion, you know, I called him up and I was like, see, you see? You know, I knew it was coming. So the book came out, it was a big bestseller, and everybody liked the book. And like 3 years went by. And I was at my office one day, and I got a call passed through to me from a journalist from La Repubblica, which is Rome's largest daily newspaper. And the journalist said, Mr. Baldacci, have you been following the Italian National Lottery scandal? And I was like, why, no, I must have missed that. He said, well, someone figured out how to fix the Italian National Lottery and used a method almost identical to the one you wrote about in The Winner. Would you like to comment on that, sir? I was like, okay, well, my first comment is, that's bad. That's very bad. I would admonish everyone, do not fix a lottery. That's a felony. You go to jail for that. Don't do it. Second comment, that is like the coolest thing anybody has ever told me in my whole life. I was like, wow, it actually worked. Now, I do a lot of research for all my novels. Hopefully you can tell that if you read them. The key about research, particularly for novels and particularly for thrillers, is to leave most of the research out of the novel. I'm not writing a textbook, I'm writing a page turner. So, and I don't ever want to write a flip book. You guys know what a flip book is? Rhetorical question, you do. You've all read a flip book. And the flip book is where a writer has done a lot of research and they're so proud of it. And they don't want to leave any of it out. But they don't want to take the time to integrate it throughout the novel. So they open the pages and they're like, this looks good. And that's where the research goes. So you, as the reader, you're reading along, you're enjoying the story, and then you hit this stuff. You're like, oh my God, flip, 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 flip. And you get past that, and then you go back to reading the story. Never want to write a flip book. So I take my research important. Well, sometimes, unfortunately, research can get you into trouble. And that happened to me when I was sitting on an Amtrak Acela train in Washington, D.C. Amtrak train takes you from D.C. to New York onto Boston. It's a bullet train, fast train. And I'm sitting at a table with two guys I don't know. They're across from me. I assume they were businessmen. You know, they were in suits and they had laptops and cell phones and Blackberries and miniature satellite towers. These guys were like doing deals, you know. And I was on my phone. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a medical examiner in the Bronx Medical Examiner's Office. And she was a renowned authority on this field of forensic science that I needed to know more about to write a book called Split Second, first in the King and Maxwell series. And all I wanted to do was talk to her to set up an appointment so I could interview her directly. You know, I like talking to all the people I do research for directly, face to face. Even when I was a lawyer, I wanted to see my witnesses. Sometimes how somebody says something, their body language is more important sometimes than what they actually say. Unfortunately, she told me she was leaving to go overseas on special assignment. She was going to be gone 3 weeks. She was working a criminal investigation in another country. It was a very sort of clandestine thing. She'd had no communication back stateside. She was going to leave from the airport before I even got to New York. Consequently, I'd either have to ask her now or wait until she got back. So I didn't want to wait. So I said, okay, well, this is the only time you have. Let's just do it. So I looked at my notes and I said, okay, Doc, this is basically how I want to murder the guy. I know. So I went through my really elaborate poisoning technique that I'd given a lot of thought to. And I said, look, Doc, you have to understand when the police come to investigate this homicide, I want to make sure they won't even know this person's been murdered. And she said, David, the way you described it, it's the perfect crime. No police investigation would be able to uncover this was a murder. I said, okay, but there's going to be a post-mortem done on the body. I need to be able to fool the medical examiner. This person, you know, that person has not been murdered. She said, David, trust me. I've often thought about murdering people. And if you do it the way you described, there's no pathological exam that I know of that will be able to detect it. So I asked her a few more questions, and I ended by saying, you know what, I got to tell you, Doc, if I ever need to kill anybody else, I'm going to call you. So I clicked off my phone, I finished writing my notes, and I look up. The guy over here has spilled his coffee from his neck to his crotch. He was possibly the most angriest man I've ever seen in my life. The guy right across from me, I will never forget this until the day I die. He wasn't saying anything, but this is what he was doing. And over his shoulder, here come the Amtrak police. Amtrak has its own police department. I did not make it to New York that day. I was detained as a person of interest by the Amtrak police, who apparently do not read a lot. So if you look in the acknowledgement section of Split Second, it's at the back of the book. That's where authors thank people who helped them. The final acknowledgement reads something like this: to any and all passengers on the Amtrak Acela train who might have overheard me discussing with an expert poisoning techniques for purposes of researching, writing the novel, and probably scared out of their wits at my seemingly diabolical intent, I apologize.